Practice makes perfect. Hey everyone, my name is Kit. Welcome to Americans Learn. This is my good friend Daniel.
Hey
Hey, what's
guys.
happening?
Hey, it's been a while since we were filming these. I'm excited to get back to this series.
Yes, absolutely. The outstanding series by the great YouTube channel Kings and Generals. They do great content, and we're
Yeah.
more than happy to get an education on what's happening with the Pacific War. Obviously, this was a major theater during the Second World War, and Kings and Generals has done outstanding work in getting all the details of how the war started and all of the battles. So there's a lot of videos for us to look at, learn about, and understand. So obviously, I'm excited to talk more about the series. And you want to know what's really cool, folks? Be sure to support the original content creators because that's what hip cool cats do. So there you go. But without further ado, Daniel, before we pull up the video, is there anything you want to bring up or talk about before we play this first video?
Yeah, so I remember the last time we were watching these, we were kind of learning the lead up, the historical lead up to both Japan and the US and where they are.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited to see if we're going to cut into like the pre-war, but close to pre-war, if we're going to continue on the history, or if we're just going to jump into the start of the territorial expansion.
Actually, from the videos that we have lined up from Kings and Generals, we're still in the pre-war period, the build up to what would be the eventual conflict between the United States and Japan. But I have to say, I'm glad you brought that up. You know, for the first two videos we saw how exactly Japan went from a feudal state to becoming a modern nation state in just a matter of just a few decades. And I was really impressed on just how fast Japan changed its entire infrastructure almost in a blink of an eye. So if you
Yeah.
were born at the end or at the beginning of the Meiji Restoration, you probably saw Japan change from feudalistic to a modern, dare I say it, European nation state, or with modern Western technologies, which is an
Yeah.
incredible sight to see.
Yeah,
So,
it's crazy. It reminds me of an image I saw a long time, which was, someone that was born that lived to be over 100, that was born in 1911, I believe, would be alive to see the first Model T as a baby, at least, roll out of the factory line, and after 100 years, get to see the Curiosity rover, a nuclear-powered SUV, land on Mars.
true, true. I mean, I'll never forget this when I showed my grandpa Skype. Because I had relatives living overseas. His words to me were, "Oh, this is like Star Trek." So there you go. I mean, at least you understood that reference. So there you go. But without further ado, enough of us talking. The video we have lined up is called "The Rise of Ultranationalism in Japan," and this is still the beginning series of it. So let's pull up this video. And Daniel, if you're ready, and if all of you are sitting down, let's play this video.
By the start of the 20th century, Japan had turned from a pre-industrialized isolationist state into a modernized regional power, defeating both the Chinese and Russian empires, annexing Korea and Taiwan, and expanding their sphere of influence across East Asia. But after the death of Emperor Meiji, new problems would arise, opportunities would be taken, and Japan would continue to
Can
expand
you pause it real quick?
as a rising.
Absolutely. What's going
So,
on?
so one thing that this reminded me of when they talk about Meiji, because I know you're a big fan of Meiji and the work that he did,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting. I feel like we're about to run into. Did you ever see the extra credits video series on Bismarck?
Um, you know what? Yes, but honestly, because the internet and all the videos that we react to, it's the blurring effect. So yes, I
Yeah.
have seen it. I don't remember it. I'm getting old. My
Yeah.
brain cells don't work anymore.
So one thing that I remember they mentioned at the very end of Bismarck, and I think they're going to not say the same thing, but mean the same thing with Meiji, is he didn't have anyone to fill his place when he was gone.
You know what? I'm glad you bring that up because obviously Meiji and Meiji, and I hate the way he was portrayed in The Last Samurai. I just honestly, the man, look, no one's perfect, and obviously, movies and modern cinema don't do their justice in presenting people accurately. But Meiji, he had people advising him too, because he just didn't wake up one morning and be like, I'm going to change everything. Because the original position of the emperor was, well, they're the figurehead, but they have no power. Meiji was able to do things, but in turning Japan into a modern nation state, it also gave rise to various political factions who were not samurai or feudal lords, but people who had their own special interests, to where, again, eventually the position of emperor would be figurehead, and the people underneath would be the power running the entire nation.
Yeah, it's very much he's completely changed the key system.
Yeah, he did.
Although it's still sort of similar.
Mm-hmm.
It's not feudal lords that you have to check in with and everything. It's now going to be business leaders and the military industrial complex and the pro-military people and then the pro-not military people. He has to actually deal with a lot more groups that have a lot more power.
Yep. And especially when you consider the fact that international trade is a thing, modern weaponry and technology. I mean, already Japan developed so fast, there was no way they were ever going to regress backwards. And to maintain their power and influence, it is, through showing each faction wanting to make their own position of power more valuable. There's going to be this, no pun intended, a Game of Thrones being played.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Great power. Today we're going to continue analyzing the evolution of the Japanese Empire during the Taisho and early Showa eras, covering its role in the Great War, subsequent expansionist developments, and the start of its trajectory towards fascism and the Pacific War. 2021 is coming to an end, and one of the highlights of the year for us was Blinkist, both for being our loyal partner and because it's a platform we've used to learn from dozens of non-fiction books during the year. Preservation of knowledge is one of the noblest human pursuits, and Blinkist is all about preserving and sharing knowledge by making it easily digestible even for the busiest among us. Blinkist takes the most interesting and relevant non-fiction books and turns them into 15-minute audios, Blinks. More than 3,000 titles are already available, which means that you can learn on the go, learn fast, and always improve your knowledge, no matter how time-constrained you are. Blinkist titles range from entrepreneurship to philosophy, from psychology to politics, but most importantly for us, there are hundreds of historical books that you can listen to. Imagine learning the most important facts of 4 books in just 1 hour. If you're interested in the history of the Pacific War, you've got to listen to Lisa Mundy's Code Girls about the thousands of American women who worked as codebreakers during World War II. While our favorite, War, How Conflict Shaped Us by Margaret Macmillan, describes the nature of human conflict. New titles are added all the time. Support our channel and your growth. Get yourself premium access. It is July 30th, 1912. Emperor Meiji is dead, his family is mourning him, and his heir is preparing to ascend to the chrysanthemum throne as Emperor Taisho. For the past 4 decades, Meiji had overseen the modernization and industrialization of the Japanese Empire, which underwent an extensive political, economic, and social revolution. At his funeral, a massive procession gathered to pay homage to the emperor that had brought a new era for Japan. Of this event, the New York Times wrote that the contrast between that which preceded the funeral car and that which followed it was striking indeed. Before it went Old Japan, after it came New Japan. And in this New Japan, many differences could already be noticed, such as a great economic growth in many sectors, aided by the financial power of the Zaibetsu business conglomerates and by the introduction of electric power. Heavy government investment in engineering, industry, and railway building that resulted in the rapid industrialization of Japan, the establishment of a Western-based education system, and the complete modernization of the army and navy.
And you can learn all of this at the Meiji Shrine in Tokyo. I visited it. If there's any place that I would recommend, if you have time to visit, at least spend the whole day there, check out the Meiji Shrine. They go into detail about all of this, and they also talk about Meiji's wife as well. and she was no flower or snowflake. She had her own power in court, and really wanted to make sure that women were also given the opportunity to get education and to play at least some kind of role in the country as well. So just for the viewing audience, if you get a chance, go do that. So
And then just looking at this, like, that's a lot of change.
Yeah.
That's on that screen right now. Like, just imagine, like, just someone having to deal with just the logistics of building a railroad. Just by itself is enormous, especially when you have no infrastructure previously.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know just Japan would just consume experts from the West like it was no one's business. And this is what they got. They got a modernized economy in no time for the culture to catch up to it.
Yep.
And I feel like that sort of has something to do with how things play, because everyone still has, there's no samurai, but there's still that mentality of Bushido that has gone for thousands of years. It's not that far back, and all of a sudden everything's changed. And what do people that previously just thought caste system, samurai, war, take territory, what are they going to do with new stuff? The same things. It reminds me when someone's talking about how the Russian Empire, although it was overthrown and became the USSR had the same exact problems that the Russian Empire had before it.
Yep. And of course, when you look at political systems and how countries change, just because there's a change doesn't mean everything's going to change along with it. It's a new coat of paint, but the interior wiring is still the same.
Oh, I wouldn't even say that. I'd say they rebuilt the house from scratch, but no one has ever lived in a modern house.
Ah, interesting. Okay, I'll roll with that.
Yet the death of Meiji would also spark a political crisis in the Japanese Empire, as the Meiji Constitution was written in such a way that the military had dominance over the civilian government. If the IJA or the IJN refused to appoint a minister for the new cabinet, then the cabinet wouldn't be formed and the government would be interrupted.
Okay.
When this happened 2 times in
I can't see this possibly becoming a major issue.
No, it's not a problem. No, it's
then
not a problem
if the
at all.
Army or Navy can just dissolve the government by not having a representative go there, I can't see how that's an issue.
Dan, look, you need to calm down, okay? Look, it's not going to be a problem, and everything's going to be okay. So everybody relax. Not a problem here. Just calm down.
In
1912 and 1913, the acting prime ministers were forced to resign. In response, the public was outraged due to the military manipulation of the cabinet, and soon demands against the oligarchic system of the Japanese Empire began to emerge. But the political uprisings would have to temporarily take a break, as in Europe, the First World War broke out in 1914 between the Central Powers and the Entente. As a consequence of the Anglo-Japanese Treaty, Japan entered the war on the side of the Entente, seizing the opportunity to expand its sphere of influence in China and the Pacific, where the German Empire had colonial possessions. While Australia and New Zealand launched invasions against German Samoa and German New Guinea, Vice Admiral Sadakichi Keto of the Second Fleet started the blockade of the German colony of Tsingtao, and Vice Admiral Yamaya Tanin of the South Seas Squadron started to pursue the fleeing German East Asia Squadron towards the Marshall Islands. Quickly, the IJN seized the Mariana, Caroline, Palau and Marshall Islands with virtually no resistance, and the IJA landed on Shandong to start the siege of Tsingtao. After 2 months, Tsingtao fell on November 7th, and the city was occupied by Japanese troops. The IJN would also continue to support naval operations in the Pacific against German raiders, and eventually it would even send squadrons into the Mediterranean to help the Entente in the region.
Whoa, I never knew that.
Oh yeah, Japan helped out a little bit. I mean, they didn't send that much.
No, I didn't know they sent a ship or like a squadron there.
Oh yeah,
Holy cow.
They sent troops as well. Not that many, but they did send some. And so this is the other thing that kind of I always wonder is, could Europe have acted differently toward Japan to avert what happened with Japan? I'm not convinced one way or another. I feel like they were bubbling to turn back. Like it's like they had shogun, 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 emperor, shogun, 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 shogun. It seems to be like a version of what happened, even though there was no shogun after the emperor. The same. It's again, it's keys. The keys were out there doing their thing.
Yeah, I think the video is going to talk about how Japan was treated by the Entente or the Allied powers after the war's end, and I think that also kind of built a lot of resentment from the Empire of Japan. But I think the video is going to talk about. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see if they do. But I never knew this. I never knew that Japan actually sent forces into the European theater during the First World War. Because that's just wow.
Yeah, it's not talked about a whole lot, but they did that. And then on top of it, it's again, Japan also has sort of like being abused by larger country syndrome because of China in their entire history.
Yeah.
So I just feel like this is all like coded into their culture to be very upset at what's going to happen.
Yeah. Fair enough.
During the war, Japan increasingly filled orders for needed war materials for its European allies. The wartime boom helped to diversify the country's industry, increase its exports, and transform Japan from a debtor to a creditor nation for the first time. Although this industrial boom also led to a rapid inflation and the outbreak of rice riots throughout Japan. Meanwhile,
these are the kind of things that Japan is not used to dealing with because they've never had this big import-export. And I'm sure they're going to say it. Their contracts are going to be limited after the war finishes.
Yep, that's going to be another big thing.
And they're not used to that. They're not used because they've been isolationists so long. It's all been self-determined internally on their island chain. And they're not used to like, oh man, we have to deal with the inflation. We have to, what are our exports? How do we plan for when there's no more exports? They don't have that experience as a nation.
In China, the empire attempted to consolidate its position in the region by presenting the 21 demands to Chinese President Yuan Shikai in 1915. These demands essentially transformed China into a Japanese protectorate, and in response, the Japanese earned the international condemnations of their allies, particularly from the United States. In the end, Japan withdrew the demands, but it would continue to extend its influence in China via more subtle means. The fall of the Russian Empire in 1917 also saw the Japanese wanting to increase their influence in the region with an intervention in Siberia, landing almost 70,000 men under the orders of General Otani Kikuzo, and penetrating as far west as Lake Baikal. In 1919, as the British and American expeditionary forces withdrew, the Japanese...
I just want to put a side note. I don't know if he was in this part of Russia with that Trans-Siberian Railway or by the European area, but my great-grandfather was part of that expedition.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I actually have his DD-214, or I guess the equivalent of it at that time, and he was part of that American expedition in what would eventually become the USSR. So he was part of that railway, part of the forces guarding that railway. And from what I've also heard, and I can't confirm this or not, I'm looking for this, but when leaving Siberia, so yeah, he was probably on this side of the map. He actually was stationed in Hawaii, right? So he would process elimination. Duh, he would be here. So yeah, he actually saw Hawaii before it got industrialized too. Can you imagine that?
I bet it'd be a lot of mosquitoes.
Well, no, like seeing the beaches before the rise of all these big hotels, like you know, like seeing like I think he told this story to my brother and also even to my mother and my uncle and aunt, like how he saw Hawaii before they built it up, you know. So yeah, that would have been a sight to see.
Yeah,
you know, there you go.
Japanese decided to stay for 3 more years, with the objective of creating an anti-Bolshevik buffer state in Siberia, an enterprise that would fail, costing a lot of money for the empire. That same year, Japan's representative Saionji Kinmochi sat alongside the Big Four at the Paris Peace Conference. As a result of the peace treaties, the Japanese Empire gained a permanent seat on the Council of the League of Nations, annexed the German leased territories in Shandong, and was granted the South Seas Mandate over the Pacific Islands they had occupied. After the war ended, the Japanese Empire emerged as a naval powerhouse, having the third largest navy in the world, and learning important anti-submarine warfare techniques and technologies that contributed to future Japanese submarine developments. Back home, the political strife ended with the adoption of a two-party political system known as the Taisho democracy. But the failure of the Siberian intervention and the termination of the Anglo-Japanese Treaty would leave Japan alone and weakened, forcing the empire to adopt a more neutral attitude towards China and to sign the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 and the subsequent London Naval Treaty of 1930 that established an international capital ship ratio, limited the size and armaments of capital ships, and forced Japan to return the leased territories in Shandong. Furthermore, the national debt started to grow again because of the renewed export competition.
And so, see, as we have mentioned earlier, Japan was not going to be ready for this post-war era. And by the way, signing a treaty about naval reductions, I'm sure it will hold. That's a treaty that's going to stay.
So the ironic thing, the two fronts, like I said, we called that they're going to have this major issue that's kind of inherent in the way that they're set up. I like to think a lot of things, especially when you're talking big things like countries or really large companies, anything they do, you can predicate based on everything they have before they take the action. And so again, they're not used to having this. So I'm sure for them, they are just like on top of. I'm sure they're not. We know they're not being favored. They're being kind of put down the rung of priority anyway because they're a brand new world-faring nation, I guess you'd say, world-relevant nation, and everyone still is very bigoted in Europe, very openly against Asia. So they're sort of just there. So they're not going to get the best of anything anyway. And ironically, the naval treaty that they had to sign with the capital ships. Ironically, they should have just followed and just built more aircraft carriers. And that would have been much better for them than trying desperately, as they do later in the war, and just invest in nothing but massive battleships, which, again, were great in the First World War, but aren't going to be that great in the Second.
I think during this time they did build 4 carriers. The problem was when all of them, I think, do get destroyed in Midway. To your point, they didn't build anything else to follow afterwards. Like, again, the construction of aircraft carriers was a game changer, and it showed the inadequacy of the battleship. And the thing is, like, building an aircraft carrier, hey folks, it's not cheap.
It's cheaper than building battleships.
Well, I mean, yeah, but here's what I mean by they lost a lot of experienced crew members, and by them not building maybe 1 or 2 more or 4 more ships, they didn't have anything backup in reserve. So,
Well, no, that's the issue, is that it takes a long time to build those ships. So even if Japan decided after Midway, we're going to rebuild 4 new carriers, even if they put all of their effort towards that, which they could have redirected, it would have hurt them in China and other places. But they just didn't have, because of the embargo, they didn't have the raw materials. I mean, effectively after like 1940, if it wasn't already nearly constructed, it's not going to be there in time for the war. And we're getting way too ahead anyway. But it's cool. You can see in real time how all of this is going to play out very obviously.
Agreed.
The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 devastated the capital. A communist party dangerous to the current regime was founded, and the rise of the tenant-farmer movement led to the outbreak of social unrest. Although the communists and the tenants were...
Remember what they say about revolution with the keys? Is all of a sudden these farmers became more educated, everything. They got electricity, so they're able to focus on other things. They're able to focus on learning to read, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden when that happens, and then you have like revolutionary communism that's jumping in. Now, it's like all of this so far is exactly what someone could predict it to be.
I agree.
were brutally repressed, thus ending the threats they posed. Economic and political pressures forced the government to enact the Peace Preservation Law of 1925 that essentially criminalized socialism, communism, republicanism, and democracy. This was the end of the Taisho democracy, with Emperor Taisho dying himself the next year. Upon the death of his father, Prince Hirohito ascended to the chrysanthemum throne on December 25, 1926. Hirohito would have a rough start as emperor, with the outbreak of the Showa financial crisis in the first year of his rule. Many businesses went bankrupt, exports decreased, silk and rice prices plummeted, and
I could just see a look on his face like, God damn it, I just got here drinking my tea and all this crap happens.
Yeah, and again, like that's the other thing I keep bringing up. Like Japan doesn't have the experience to deal with this industrial scale of economics, and they're gonna make decisions that aren't gonna help them, but what you would expect from people that don't have a lot of experience.
Agreed.
unemployment skyrocketed. The situation worsened with the Great Depression of 1929, but Japan's finance minister, Takahashi Korekiyo, would start working to devalue the currency and to provide economic relief, measures that would be very successful. The four major zaibatsu also managed to avoid great losses in the panic.
Mitsubishi. Never seen that before. Never seen that symbol before.
Leading to their
So I don't remember which one of these it is, but I do know there were samurai that started a couple of these.
I think it's Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi. I think it has to be because okay, horrible reference because someone's gonna type this in the comments and be like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. But from Shogun Total War, because I think one of the factions flags looks like the Mitsubishi flag.
I mean that's fair enough. Someone will tell us if we're wrong, but it's like again, it's like because all this industrialization happened so fast.
Mm-hmm.
No one really knows where the limits are.
Yeah, exactly.
And not to be fair, most countries didn't either. This is pretty new, but everyone else already had like pre-existing alliances and could kind of back and support other countries. Japan has, as they said, they basically don't have anyone, and they're starting to not trust anyone.
Yeah.
Domination over every field of Japanese industry in the following years. In the countryside, the establishment of Nihon Shugi organizations led to the emergence of emperor-centered ultranationalism and Japanese fascism. The Nihon Shugi won increasing support because they offered solutions to the economic problems of the rural countryside. It was their practical program of cooperatives and credit associations, not their ideology, that accounted for their growing popularity and local influence. This new Japanese nationalism leaned on the Bushido moral code and the idea of racial.
As you have said, the Bushido Code still survived.
It's the thing that they've trusted for. I mean, imagine the U.S. always thinks of itself as super capitalistic, even though it's really, ironically, socialist in most respects, especially for the very, very wealthy, more capitalist as you go down.
Yep.
And so if America did this big radical change into a new government system, and it started having all these issues associated, America would be like, okay, guys, let's go back to the thing that worked. Let's do the capitalism again. And so that's exactly what they're doing here. They have a new system. Everything's changing. And they just abandon their past way of life that they are, I'm sure, looking back on. Like, people today look back on the 80s, or people in the 80s look back on the 50s. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's something looking back at antiquity with rose-colored glasses. I think that's the phrase, rose-colored glasses, looking back at the era. And look, I mean, when you think of like samurai, you're thinking, oh wow, noble warriors. But or even at with Americans or Europeans looking back at knights, like these are virtuous individuals. But in all reality, knights and samurai were thugs and murderers and not good people.
Yeah.
And the ones that are deemed like good warriors or noble men, they were the exception. They were the very rare exception. The general rule was you stayed away from those people as far as you can. They are not to be trusted.
Yeah, and it's like, again, if also from a Bushido point of view, that's shogun. That's the entire shogun a hierarchical structure of Japan. They already have emperors that they've been able to kick out. They've been able to dissolve. Who are the people that are left who have not taken hits, that keep rising in power? Because that power has to go somewhere. It's the military and the military-industrial complex. But it seems mostly the military, because the history of Japan is almost exclusively the military running everything anyway and trying their best to expand.
Yep.
And now they're having issues. They're going back to nostalgia. The existing military power is taking over again.
Yeah.
I wonder how this turns out.
Yeah, but I will say this: that samurai armor looks so badass.
Superiority over other Asian nations. It was aimed against Western criticism and restrictions on Japanese immigration. In the military itself, an ultranationalist faction, known as the Kodoha, was formed by General Sadao Araki, seeking to purge the corruption in the government by establishing a militaristic administration run by Emperor Hirohito himself. Moreover, the Kodoha disliked modernization and the economic control of the Zaibatsu, and also wanted to crush communism once and for all by attacking the Soviet Union and expanding into Siberia. Opposed to them was the more moderate Toseha faction.
I love it. Just like before, it's like, hey, the shogun's not technically in control. The emperor's in control. The shogun listens to him, even though the emperor has no power to say no to anything the shogun says. And what do they just create? I know. It's not the shogun in charge. It's the military high command that's in charge. And they listen to the emperor, except the emperor really can't say anything. But that's what they're doing.
I think in many ways you could say that this is the shogun. The only difference is this is a shogun that wants to be modern, have advanced weaponry, and have economic growth. The previous shogun, obviously from before Meiji took over, more isolationist tradition and so much more, but it kept them stagnant. So Shogun returned, but it's more. It wants to be more hip and modern. It wants to be wearing the latest clothes and everything else.
Yeah, like America, we don't have royalty anymore. We just have people with the same power structure as royalty. It's completely different, though.
Yeah, the only difference is too. Like here's a side note, especially about European monarchs. A lot of them were broke. They were not rich. They like that's something people don't talk about. Royal families had some serious financial problems, which is why they always kept a relationship with merchants, always private and secret. So there you go. But that's a story for another day.
But by the way, also what happened in Europe. I mean, again, there's only so many ways for humans to express themselves in a societal function.
True.
Action, which was also right-wing, but acknowledged that the IJA needed the support of the Zaibatsu and the continuation of a modernization process to wage global war. Meanwhile, in Manchuria, the Kwantung Army had been established back in 1919 to defend the Liaodong Peninsula and the South Manchurian Railway. In the following decade, this army would become a stronghold for the Kodoha, advocating for a more aggressive expansionist policy in mainland Asia, and going so far as to plot the assassination of the Manchurian warlord Zhang Zuolin. In 1931, seeking the perfect excuse to expand into the rich region of Manchuria, the Kwantung leaders purposely sabotaged the Japanese-controlled railway to blame the Chinese garrison nearby and thus start a conflict in the region. On September 18th, the plan of the Kwantung Army was executed, and the Mukden incident soon sparked a full-blown Japanese invasion of Manchuria.
Applies it right there.
Soon,
I just learned this recently from another video that came out. That I think it was this one when they blew. The idea was that they were going to blow up the rail and then cause the train to go by and then fall off, and then the sound would cause the Chinese to come over, and they would go, hey, you guys are in the area. You clearly caused this explosion. We're going to fight you now. But they didn't set the explosive properly. So the train just kept going. But the Chinese garrison did come over to see what the noise was about. And then they were like, you tried to blow up this train. We're going to come after you. Same outcome.
What could possibly go wrong?
Every city along the South Manchurian Railway fell into Japanese hands, and by October, the Kwantung Army had occupied the Jilin, Taonan, Yanbian, and eastern Liaoning areas. Although
Okay,
initially
pause
shocked
one
by
more
the
time.
insubordination.
Yep.
So I just want to throw this out there. I think it's always amazing to think about. So China's not been modernized in all this time that is happening. So you can imagine, like, Japan fighting like farmers that have been conscripted that don't even have guns.
Yeah.
I've never really seen depicted. Maybe it's out there and I just don't know it. What it looked like when Japan was on this, like when they would just carve through China. What it actually looked. How did it? I want to see what the battle scenes looked like, not the actual like down like how
there's actually the only movie I could point to a reference, and I'm forgetting its title now, but it was made in China. It had to deal with I think I can't say the word, but the assault on Nanking, where
oh, I know, I've seen that one.
Yeah, that movie. Yeah, the biggest twist of all, the person fighting for human rights and advocate was associated with the Nazi Party.
Yeah, no, there's still a statue of him, because that's how bad Japan. I mean, Japan was like were absolute monsters to any place they occupied.
I mean, no, I'm sorry, but the only reason why I'm laughing is just like the person who's advocating for human rights, and so is associated with another.
No, he's not associated. He's the German ambassador.
Yeah.
And the only thing that would I don't even think we could talk on YouTube about the stuff that he witnessed and stopped.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is I don't need a movie in that sense. But like just like they're showing here, I would love to see how a tactical battle view of how Japan would win these battles, and I would love to know what the Chinese actually held, because I'm sure they just levied conscripts that had no idea what they were doing, and Japan just had better equipment. I just want to understand it more than I do.
Yeah. I'm folks, if there's a movie or a series, please type in the comment section below. Perhaps maybe we might someday watch it. So there you go.
And by the way, I think the movie you're talking about, I don't think it's a Chinese movie. I think it happened in China. I think it's an American movie.
No, I think because it was mostly like the movie I'm thinking about. All the like it was there's Chinese, Japanese, like it wasn't English. Like there's English subtitles, but no one was speaking English in the movie.
Then I guess there's two movies on that we're thinking of different ones.
Yeah. You know what? If I find it, I'll share it with you later. I'll tell you. Like,
yeah, the one I'm thinking of is like something flowers or something of that nature.
Okay. Well, I
think Nicolas Cage might be in it. I don't remember.
Okay. Then we are definitely thinking about two different movies.
And we're still technically, 10 years in advance?
Yes,
already.
we are. Yes, we are. So there we go.
The government was now impressed by the quick victories in Manchuria and were starting to send reinforcements on their way. In the following months, the Zhengqiao and Jinzhou campaigns secured the western Liaoning and Qiqihar areas, and the fall of Harbin finally destroyed the remaining resistance in the region. With Manchuria firmly under Japanese control, the Kwantung Army established the Manchukuo puppet state and started a pacification campaign that allowed them to control the political administration of this new state. Despite its insubordination, the Kwantung Army would be rewarded for its great success, establishing a new era of Gekukujo inside the IJA. In response to the Western condemnation of the Japanese aggression, the League of Nations ordered the Lytton Commission to investigate the incident, which prompted Japan to exit the League of Nations, a decision that was influenced by the military and the nationalists. By 1933, Takahashi's policies had managed to bring Japan to an economic recovery. But the next year, the finance minister reduced military spending to avoid inflation, which resulted in a strong negative response from the strong militaristic fascism that was rising in Japan. As the military's dominance over the government continued to grow after the May 15th incident, the country saw the emergence of right-wing admirals that wanted unlimited naval growth, and the empire started to dream about a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. From 1933 to 1936.
A side note, there's something I really like, and no one take this the wrong way, but some of the propaganda pictures that you see from the various nations during that time era of, oh, here's peace in our times, and it has that like that's there's this
It's
peaceful
art.
image.
It's art.
Yeah, it's art, but it's like this peaceful image of, oh, hey, greater peace, and goes all the while underneath it is this, oh, hey, we're gonna just do war crimes, expansion, and so much more. It's just there's just something about those images, like, wow, underneath all those smiling faces is blood, madness, and insanity.
And then another thing that I really do kind of get a little annoyed by is that most people still consider the start of World War II, I should say, to be the invasion of Poland.
No, it wasn't.
No, exactly. It started here, but so many people are like, no. It started in 1939 because when Japan did their invasion of China, it was a regional conflict, and only once Germany entered by attacking Poland and everyone got involved. Now it's a world war. I always felt that was such a Eurocentric view.
Yeah.
It's like you need both of them to be at war, because I'm sure, because you know what I'll tell you? There wasn't as much war in World War I on the Pacific side, and it was still called a world war. It was basically the colonies that were there. And then, there were countries in conflict, but not to the same degree.
I'm glad you brought that up, because in World War I, sorry, folks, we're going a little bit off topic here, but in World War I, the German Empire was succeeding in one theater in particular, and that was in South Africa, because the German military, there was I think it's now called Namibia or something like that now, but previously it was like East German South Africa or something like that. It was a colony of Germany at the time. And they were like, they invaded into what was then to be called South Africa. They were, the German general leading his forces was very successful. In fact, I think,
I remember that guy. Yeah, he was I think the only German commander who didn't take a direct loss. He was very good at guerrilla fighting.
Yeah, and he had to be told, like, hey, look, the show's over in Europe. Yeah, kind of got to wrap it up, buddy.
Yeah, but it's like in reality, the world wars were brewing on both sides of the world. And Japan just was the first to ignite with China. I mean, you can argue, I wouldn't even argue Manchuria, because that was sort of its own thing and blah, 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 blah. But like the invasion of China, I always consider the start of the World War, or at least the first half of it. Yeah. And then Europe completed the picture later.
Yeah, agreed.
The Japanese would use proxy armies in Inner Mongolia with the objective of creating a Mongolian buffer state next to Manchukuo. The successes in the provinces of Jehol and Chahar allowed for the establishment of the Inner Mongolian Autonomous Government, a Japanese puppet state under the rule of Prince Demchok Dongrab. Since 1934, the retirement of General Araki led to the decline in influence of the Kodaha faction, culminating in the February 26th incident of 1936, an attempted coup d'etat by Kodaha followers. The coup resulted in the death of several government members and Toseha followers, including Minister Takahashi and General Jotaro Watanabe. Yet Hirohito opposed the coup, and the uprising was crushed after 2 days. The following months saw the purging of the Kodaha, the abandonment of the London Naval Treaty, and a rise of tensions with China that would inevitably lead to war. Next week, our coverage of the prelude to the Pacific War will continue. We're going to turn to the other side of the Pacific and look at the United States, its objectives in East Asia, and the consequences of World War I. Unfortunately, not every event and fun detail can be told in a 20-minute video. And in order to alleviate...
All right, let's stop here and stop sharing. There we go. All right, so there's a lot to unpack. So, Daniel, I'm going to give you the final word.
So I think I like how much time they're putting into the build-up. I feel like so much, and especially like when I remember from like high school, I always felt that it was always inadequate to start with. But it reminds me, just like, when America tells this story in our textbooks, it's like, and all of a sudden, for no reason, Pearl Harbor happened, and there's no real need to talk about the things that led up to it. They just sort of happened because we're too great, because they hated us for our freedoms.
They hate us because they ain't us.
They hate us because they ain't us. And it's like you watch these videos and you're just reminded that no, this is a multi-100-year buildup that happened to move pieces in such a direction that led to Japan being in this position where why they went in such a militaristic direction is because that's their history. Why they withdrew from all the League of Nations and everything else in these treaties, they felt that they weren't being fairly treated on one hand, and the other was that the military was like, no, but we want to just invade, which is the whole point of those treaties, to keep people from doing. And you can see them just very rapidly go from, hey, we're going to send support and troops to the battlefields of World War I, and look how much money we're making. Look how well the economy's doing. Look how Meiji is existing and very much alive, to emperors being forced to resign continuously, the military gaining factional power back, and becoming more conquest. More
Yeah.
in conquest. And it's like, before, Japan always wanted to take over China. That's always sort of Japan's ongoing to-do list, is to take over China at some point. But they never before in history have had the technological support and infrastructure to do it. But thanks to Westerners putting so much involvement in developing Japan to become basically a colonial almost possession like they do with China, but not quite in the same rank. We made this happen, and Japan, I felt, grew. I mean, although it's an amazing story of how under Meiji they evolved economically the way that they did,
Yeah.
nonetheless, they evolved so quickly their culture just couldn't keep up with the ability of what they could do. And now, so they just went back to what they used to do with new weapons and new tactics, new logistics, new everything.
Yeah. All right. So, folks, please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Americans Learn. We're uploading a lot of great content. I am reacting to Julius Caesar's campaign in Gaul, and I'm pretty sure there will be no devastating conflict to come after that one. So please stay tuned as Daniel and I continue to react to the ongoing conflict, or what will eventually become the beginning conflict of the Pacific War. I want to thank all of you again for watching us, and we are out of here. Bye-bye, folks.